Okay, guys, now that I've successfully uploaded chapter 12, moving on to chapter 13 now. Going to go through this really quickly. It's going to be 15 or 20 minutes. I am recording from my daughter's bedroom. You guys met my daughter the other day, so don't tell my wife that I'm showing you this mess. But yeah, that's my daughter's bedroom. So chapter 13, guys, it deals with journalism and politics, kind of the relationship between journalism and politics, broadly speaking. And I think this is an interesting quote from Joseph Pulitzer, who we've talked about some this semester in the context of yellow journalism. Interestingly enough, right, that he would say something like this, but he kind of cleaned up his act as as his career went on. He says, "Our republic and its press will rise or fall together. An able, disinterested, public-spirited press with trained intelligence to know the right and courage to do it can preserve that public virtue without which popular government is a sham and a mockery." And you can read the rest of the quote on your own, but he's saying that in a democracy, you absolutely have to have a good press, a critical press. Without a critical press, a detached press, he uses the word disinterested, but he means neutral, objective, then we can't hold our public officials to account. If you look at the relationship between politicians and the news media, it's very interesting. First of all, the research that we have suggests that there isn't some big conspiracy. You know, obviously there are exceptions, but most journalists they work hard and they try to be fair and they try to be balanced. However, in spite of that, a lot of research shows that there is a kind of slant, a bias in news coverage. And we've kind of talked a little bit about why that exists. I mean, related to the power structure, the politicians are very powerful. They have great kind of media relations machinery behind them. They release a lot of statements and they have press conferences and they're most likely to be sources. But also they have these tools that they use like news leaks and trial balloons. So a news leak is when the politician will deliberately kind of leak information to journalists with the hope that the journalist or journalists will publish the information, and that generates publicity, right? It gets some kind of a message across. So that's kind of one of the things that some politicians will do. Another thing that they'll do is they'll put out these trial balloons. That's when they leak information to the press about a proposed plan or idea just to kind of see how it's going to be received. And then it's just a trial. If it's received negatively, they can just say, "Oh no, well I don't know where that came from," or "You guys misunderstood. I mean, I don't know who got that leak or how you got that, but it's blah blah blah. You've misunderstood." So that's kind of a creative strategy that politicians can use. Let's look at some of the changes. If we look at political news, it's not the same now as it was 40, 50, 60 years ago. For example, in 1960, during the presidential election, the news was 75% positive in tone. In 1992, it was just 40% positive in tone. So the news is getting more negative. We've talked about that in this class. Now that's from 92. I don't have data on 2012, but I'm guessing that it was probably even more negative than it was in 1992. That would be my hypothesis. Also, if you look at candidate quotes, they shrunk from about 14 lines on average in 1960 to about 7 lines in 1992. So think about the implications of that. Now, in the present context, current political climate, campaign coverage is increasingly driven by opinion polls. You're constantly seeing these opinion polls when you're watching the news, right, or reading newspapers. That's a really important part of the game now. Also, political advertising is really big business. More than $1 billion was raised by the candidates in both 2008 and 2012 during the presidential elections. And a lot of this money is spent on political advertisements. The other thing that's really important and very dominant, and which I know you guys have noticed, is negative advertisements. A lot of the ads now aren't positive ads that kind of talk about the candidate and, well, this is what I'm going to do to change the country, or this is my political program. What a lot of the ads will do now is they kind of do it in reverse. Instead of talking about me, myself, and my program as a politician, I'm going to talk about my opponent. And what I'll do specifically is I will attack my opponent. So, and you've all, during presidential season, or I should say during campaign season, either at the national level or for local elections, these are very prominent on radio ads, TV ads, these kind of negative attack ads. They're very dominant or prevalent nowadays. So a question that we have to ask ourselves is, are these ads effective? Do they work? There's some research that would suggest that they do work some of the time, but most of the research that we have suggests that the ads do not work, that they're not very effective. The ads tend to produce more negative attitudes about the candidate who's doing the attacking, right? And more positive attitudes about the candidate that's being attacked. So people kind of get this cynical view of the person who's doing the attacking. We also know that voters generally don't like negative ads. That's the response, the general, more dominant response from most voters. We also know that especially young people don't like the negative ads, and these ads tend to kind of alienate young people from the voting process. Another thing that's important to think about is the relationship between politics and entertainment. Politicians know just as well as anyone that they must get our attention, and so they must entertain us to at least some extent. And so candidates are now using catchy songs, they're using catchy, really creative slogans, right? Candidates will adopt hit songs for their campaigns. In some rare cases, original songs are produced for specific candidates, like, for example, will.i.am, his song Yes We Can for the Obama campaign back in 2008. There have been some awkward moments, such as when Bruce Springsteen, who's a liberal, who doesn't like the Republican Party very much, if you follow him, he forbade the use of his songs at Republican events. So if you guys know Bruce Springsteen, he had that song way back in the 80s called Born in the USA. And so this was, it's kind of this really patriotic song. And so there were some Republican events were playing this song, and he forbade it. And he could do that because he has the copyright. So that potential for awkward moments certainly exists. A really major part of any election season is the political debate. Political debates represent arguably the single most important aspect of political communication, because this is when people get to see these two or more candidates, just going head to head and debating their ideas, right? But debates have changed. They're not the same now as they were decades ago. If you look at back in the 19th century, the debate between Abe Lincoln and Stephen A. Douglas, that was more than 5 hours long, and they debated many, many issues. Today, the debates are much shorter. They're also closely, carefully choreographed from, who's in the audience and how the candidates are positioned and what the backdrop is going to look like, right? All of that stuff is choreographed and negotiated by the candidates. And you could argue that we don't get as much out of the debates now as the electorate did back, even 60 or 70 years ago. The Kennedy-Nixon debate was a really interesting debate. There's been a lot of research done on that debate from 1960, Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. So when they debated, some people at this time obviously have television, but not everybody has television, right, in 1960. So some people watched the debate on TV, and some people listened to the debate on the radio. What's interesting is that the people who watched the debate on television said that Kennedy had won. remember, Kennedy was, if you can actually go onto YouTube and look at the debate if you want. It's kind of interesting, but Kennedy was young, he was handsome, well dressed, he was really confident, he smiled, he was funny, and so people that watched on TV said he won the debate. People that listened on the radio, though, said that Nixon won the debate. And researchers looking at the situation said that Nixon really presented the more complete and convincing arguments in that particular debate. And he probably, from a political science perspective, he really won the debate. But politically, he lost the debate because, presentation is so important in these kinds of things. So that raises a lot of important questions, and I think there are many kind of implications of those findings. So if you're a politician, you have to know how to use the media to your advantage. Obviously, politicians try to garner the most sympathetic coverage possible. Throughout the early part of the 20th century, candidates were using radio and TV, right? FDR had his fireside chats on the radio with the American people in the 1930s and 1940s. That was very effective for him. Today, candidates and politicians are using still radio and newspaper, but also television and increasingly social media and the internet. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. One of the first things you got to do if you're a politician and if you're running for office is set up an Instagram account, set up a YouTube account, set up a Twitter account, set up a Facebook account. Think about how Obama used social media back in 2012. So if you guys remember, in 2012, and you can Google this or YouTube it or whatever, but Clint Eastwood gave a speech at the Republican National Convention where he went on this diatribe against Obama, and he sort of lectured this empty chair, like pretending that it was Obama, right? And so the Obama campaign responded in a way that I have to admit, not personally a huge, Obama fan, but he responded very creatively. I have to admit that. He released a tweet of him in the Oval Office, and to see this, if you just Google it, and if you Google Obama, this seat's taken, you'll find it, and it was retweeted like 60,000 times or something like that. But it's a picture of Obama in the Oval Office, in his chair, in the president's chair, but it's like from the back, so you can only see the back of his head and the back of the chair, and it said, "This seat's taken." So that was a really powerful response to Eastwood's speech, and he didn't have to, give a speech. He didn't have to release a statement. Just a simple tweet, and it was very effective. In terms of just kind of responding to Eastwood's speech. If you look at this study in 2012 by Pew, it found that 39% of Americans used social media to discuss politicians during the election season. And just to give you an example and just some idea of how dominant this and prevalent this is becoming, these kind of social media debates and discussions. During the first Obama-Romney debate in 2012, more than 10 million tweets were sent out, with the little hashtags about the debate. So that's an astounding number. Obama's speech at the DNC in 2012 initiated more than 2.5 million online discussions. Not just single tweets, but online discussions. So really powerful. And if you're a candidate for office, you absolutely have to engage with the electorate via social media. This is not a luxury. It's not kind of extra or going above and beyond. It's really absolutely required now. Another thing that you have to keep in mind as a politician is that there's nothing that is off the record anymore. You have to recognize as a politician that anything that you say could be recorded. You have to assume that there's somebody in the audience that's got a cell phone and that's recording what you're saying. Think about what happened to Mitt Romney back in 2012. He's at a private dinner for his wealthiest donors. You think that that'd be a pretty safe place, right? Well, it was recorded. And in this dinner, he said he had this really kind of controversial and arguably deeply problematic quote. He said, 47% of Americans pay no income tax. And what he was saying there, if you read back, or you can actually watch it on YouTube or whatever, the speech, it's uploaded on many sites. But what he was saying is that there are a bunch of poor people in America, and they're going to vote for President Obama no matter what. So I'm not even going to try to get those people's votes. And he said 47% of Americans pay no income tax. I mean, it's wrong. It's not. That's not accurate, obviously. But damage was done. I mean, it was recorded, it was uploaded, it was released to the media. It created a huge uproar. People attacked Romney. They said, well, it's false. It's not true that 47% of Americans pay no income tax. People that are in lower income brackets kind of took offense, by the suggestion that, they they weren't even worthy of Romney's attention, that they would automatically cast their vote for the person who they thought would benefit them economically. So there were a lot of problems for Romney in the aftermath of that quote and that speech. And I think the lesson for politicians is that you have to assume that somebody is recording what you're saying, and so you just pretend that there's no such thing anymore as off the record in this modern digital age. Also, social media can allow for certain stories to spread and kind of take on a life of their own. So Romney said, in a lot of the examples that are in the textbook, these are examples that are straight from your textbook, but you can tell a lot of the examples are sort of, the authors are kind of maybe picking on the Republicans a little bit. My guess is that they're more liberal, so don't take offense if you're a Republican, but these are the examples that they chose. So Romney said, "I love Big Bird," and basically what happened was a lot of people just had fun with it. If you can also just like Google this, and what people did is they put out a bunch of tweets, social media posts with photos and videos of Big Bird kind of responding to Romney's comments with, I mean, I'm not going to repeat anything because a lot of it is not really, PG. But so people had fun with it, and they kind of used that as an opportunity to kind of attack Mitt Romney. There was also the case of Todd Akin. Todd Akin is a former representative for the state of Missouri. And in 2012, he made a really problematic remark. He said that women could control pregnancy in cases of, quote, legitimate rape. What he was saying was that, because he was talking about abortion, he was arguing that abortion should be absolutely illegal. And somebody said, well, what about when women are raped? And he said, well, we don't have to worry about that because women, if they're really being raped, they can prevent getting pregnant. They can like turn a button on. They can press a button and turn something on inside their body that prevents them from getting pregnant. And so this was, I mean, it's wrong. It's scientifically, it's preposterous, but it generated a lot of backlash on Twitter and on Facebook, especially Twitter. I mean, if you Google this also and look up, if you do Todd Akin legitimate rape or something, you'll find a lot of the tweets. He had to deal with a lot of backlash in the aftermath of saying this. So social media can be a great tool for politicians, but it could also potentially bring about their downfall. They have to be very careful. Think about government transparency in the age of the internet. Think about all these online databases that exist with information about you and me. Who did you vote for? Who did you donate to? Or not necessarily who did you vote for, but did you vote in a particular election? To whom did you donate funds to? Which politicians? Different political activities. It's easy for journalists and even citizens to access a lot of this. Certainly easy for the government to access a lot of this information. So it's it's more information, so in a sense that's good, but some might argue that this actually borderlines on a type of invasion of privacy. So those are kinds of things that you want to be thinking about. And if we were in class, we're not, but we would I would pose this question to you, and we could maybe have a little discussion on this, but at least think about it. And the last thing from this lesson, this is a short lesson, as I promised, smart mobs. A smart mob is a group of people that communicates via text message or other wireless network to coordinate activities. It's activists, basically. They can coordinate their activities using their cell phones or whatever device. And researchers have called this phenomenon the phenomenon of the smart mob. In Egypt, in Indonesia, Philippines, during the Occupy Wall Street protests of 2011, activists and protesters were coordinating activities via text message in many cases. Okay, we're going to meet at this place, at this square, at this time. I'm going to bring these flyers, and you bring, we need people to bring banners that say X, Y, and Z. And so this is something that protesters, citizens are using with increasing frequency. That's all I got for chapter 13, and that's good news for you because it's a relatively short lesson. I hope I can successfully upload this. First, I hope I can successfully stop the recording. Okay, this is embarrassing. How do I stop the recording? I'm using a program called Camtasia, and I don't like it. Okay, here we go. Bye.